Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The morning started like any other with the gentle hum of the coffee machine and the familiar comfort of our kitchen. My wife, Clara, was humming softly to herself as she flipped through a magazine at the table. The normalcy of the scene made what was to come even more jarring. I sat down with my laptop to check my emails, a routine that usually bore nothing more exciting than promotional ads and work-related updates. But today, nestled among the mundane, was something that caught my eye, a message from an email address I didn't recognize, its subject line chillingly direct: "You need to see this about Clara." Curiosity piqued and a twinge of unease creeping up my spine, I clicked open the email. It was from a stranger, claiming to have proof of Clara's infidelity. The message was concise, filled with specific dates and locations, times when I thought she was at her book club or a yoga class. Attached were photos, too many of them, too specific to be dismissed. They showed Clara, less clothed than I had ever seen her in public, laughing and enjoying herself with a man I had never seen before. The initial shock was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I looked up at Clara, searching her face for any sign that this was a sick joke, that the woman I loved couldn't be the person in those pictures. But her eyes, when she caught me staring, held a flicker of something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't innocence either. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with a concern that now seemed contrived. I couldn't speak. I just turned the laptop around. Watching her face fall, the color draining from her cheeks as she looked at the screen, was both vindicating and heartbreaking. She whispered a denial, but her voice broke, betraying her. "Who sent these? Why would they?" she started to say but stopped when another photo loaded, showing her in an unmistakably intimate moment. "It says here." My voice was hoarse, and I had to clear my throat before I continued. "It says you've been doing this for months. And this guy, the one you were with, he sent these because you both apparently decided he was disposable." Clara's face crumpled, the truth written all over it, confirming my worst fears. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed, reaching out to me, but I pulled away. "Why, Clara? Why him? Why anyone?" The questions poured out of me, each one laced with a growing sense of betrayal. She tried to explain, words tumbling out in a desperate spill. "It started as just some fun," she said, "an adventure that went too far. They met him at a party, one that I had missed due to a work commitment. One thing led to another, and what was meant to be a one-night thrill evolved into more meetings, always hidden, always under the guise of her innocent hobbies." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. The noise seemed to snap Clara out of her pleading. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Divorce," I stated plainly, the word tasting bitter on my tongue but necessary. "This isn't something we come back from." As I packed a bag with essentials, her cries echoed through our home, a stark soundtrack to the end of our life together. Each zipper pulled and snapped closed severed ties, my mind already racing with what needed to be done next. Walking out the door, I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew it was away from her, away from the life we had built on lies. My thoughts churned with plans for what came next, the need for revenge a burning, cold fire in my chest. Whatever path I took from here, it would be one where justice, for the heartbreak, for the betrayal, would be served. The cool air outside was a stark contrast to the stifling tension I left behind. I drove aimlessly at first, the city lights blurring past as the gravity of my new reality sank in. My phone buzzed incessantly, Clara's name flashing on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Instead, I headed to the only place I felt I could think clearly, the quiet overlook on Harper's Ridge, a spot we often visited together to watch the city sprawl beneath us. As I parked the car, the silence of the night enveloped me. I needed a plan, but first, I wanted answers. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the man from the photos. It rang once, twice, then a cautious voice answered. "Who is this?" I'm the husband of the woman you've been seeing. We need to talk. There was a pause, a hesitation, then a resigned sigh. I guess you saw the photos. Meet me at Harper's Ridge. 20 minutes. Don't make me come looking for you. I ended the call without waiting for a response and stared out into the darkness. The minutes stretched long and heavy until a pair of headlights approached. A car parked beside mine, and the man from the photos stepped out, his posture defensive. You've got a lot of nerve, I said as he approached, my voice cold and steady despite the turmoil inside. He stopped a few feet away, hands raised slightly in a non-threatening gesture. Look, I didn't mean for any of this to go down like this. She told me you were separated, on the way to a divorce. I didn't know. Save it. Why send the photos? If you were just a fling, why go through the trouble? I demanded, cutting him off. He looked down, scuffing his shoe against the gravel. I cared about her, you know. And then they just dumped me like I was nothing. It hurt. I thought if I couldn't have her, then no one should. The raw honesty in his voice didn't soften my anger, but it added a layer of complexity to the situation that I hadn't expected. And now? What now? I asked, the weight of the next steps pressing down on me. I don't know. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought maybe you guys would sort it out, maybe open up the relationship or something, he said, almost sheepishly. That's not how we fix this. What's done is done. My reply was terse. I need something from you, though. He eyed me warily. What's that? Everything you know about their meetings, places, times, any proof you have. If we're ending this, it's going to be clean and clear. No loose ends. He nodded slowly, understanding the finality in my tone. I'll send you everything tonight. Emails, messages, everything. Good. And after that, you stay away from us. From her. Forever. It wasn't a request, it was a directive. As he walked back to his car, the cold clarity of revenge settled in my mind. The betrayal was deep, but I would ensure the fallout was controlled and absolute. I drove home, not to Clara, but to an old friend's house to crash on his couch, my next moves forming like chess pieces in a game where I now had the upper hand. I woke early, the first light of dawn barely cresting the horizon. My friend, Matt, had been surprisingly understanding when I showed up at his door last night, bag in hand. He didn't ask questions then, just handed me a beer and the spare key. This morning, however, his curiosity couldn't be contained. Man, you look like hell. Want to talk about it? Matt asked as he handed me a strong cup of coffee. Not much to say. Clara's been cheating. I found out last night, I replied, keeping my voice level, though the bitterness lingered. Jesus, that's rough. What's your plan? His voice was heavy with concern. I'm meeting with a lawyer today. I want everything settled legally before she can twist the narrative. Matt nodded, clapping a supportive hand on my shoulder. Good man. Keeping it clean and legal. Need me to come with? I shook my head. I've got it. But thanks. At 10 a.m., I was sitting in the stark, modern office of Ellen Shaw, a recommended divorce attorney known for her no-nonsense approach. Her sharp eyes scanned the documents and photos I'd laid out in front of her. These are damning, indeed. With evidence like this, the divorce should lean heavily in your favor, especially regarding any financial settlements, Ellen remarked, her tone professional but not unkind. What about the house and her belongings? I asked, needing to know how deep the cuts would go. We can likely negotiate an agreement where you keep the house, given the circumstances. As for her belongings, we'll detail a move-out schedule. It's better if you don't interact during that process. The conversation shifted towards the logistics, a timeline forming that seemed both swift and fair. Ellen was efficient, outlining the steps we'd take to ensure the divorce was as painless as possible, for me, at least. After the meeting, I felt a semblance of control returning, but the emotional toll was still heavy. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a new email from the man Clara had been seeing. True to his word, he'd sent everything. Emails, photos, and messages that detailed their trysts, their plans, all laid bare. It was more than enough to fortify my case. I spent the afternoon compiling the evidence, each piece a nail in the coffin of our marriage. By evening, I was mentally exhausted but resolute. The next step was confronting Clara with the divorce papers, a prospect I both dreaded and longed for. The next morning, I drove to our house, the documents neatly packed in my briefcase. Clara was there, as I expected, her eyes red-rimmed, a stark contrast to her usually impeccable appearance. "You're back," she stated, her voice flat, resigned. "To settle things." "Here," I said, handing her an envelope containing the divorce papers. She took it, her hands trembling slightly. "Is there no chance for us? For forgiveness?" "This goes beyond forgiveness, Clara. It's about respect, trust, things we can't just rebuild. Not after this." Clara opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents. "You're being more than fair," she whispered after a moment. "It's not about fairness. It's about moving on," I replied, my tone more gentle than I intended. She nodded, tears spilling over. "I'll sign them. I'll move out by the end of the week." "Thank you." It was all I could manage. As I left, the house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed just a shell of memories, both good and bad. But as I drove away, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The path ahead would be lonely, but it was clear, unburdened by the deceit that had clouded my vision. The retribution wasn't fiery or dramatic, it was cold, precise, and utterly final. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. Clara signed the papers without contesting any terms, her swift compliance a silent testament to her guilt. The house was now solely mine, the walls echoing the emptiness of a life abruptly severed. Clara had moved out, taking little with her, leaving behind only the ghostly imprint of our shared existence. In the weeks that followed, the solitude of my home became oppressive, a constant reminder of the betrayal. I could not shake the images the stranger had sent, the laughter and intimacy captured in those photographs. It gnawed at me, a relentless worm of anger and hurt. I spent my days plotting, my mind twisting around ideas of revenge that went beyond the court's rulings. It wasn't enough that she lost the house and some of her dignity, the emotional scar she had inflicted demanded a deeper retribution. One evening, I found myself parked outside a cozy downtown bistro, the same one where Clara and her lover had often met, according to the emails. I watched from a distance, knowing this was where they found their happiness, where they had betrayed me. My plan was simple and cruel, a public confrontation that would strip them of their secrecy and shame them before the eyes of the world. I didn't have to wait long. They arrived together, laughing, his arm around her waist. Something dark coiled within me at the sight. I approached them just as they reached the entrance, my presence startling them both. "Enjoying the night?" I asked, my voice dripping with venom. Clara's eyes widened in shock, her face paling. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd see how the other half lives," I replied, my gaze shifting between the two. "Or should I say, loves?" Her companion squared his shoulders, his face hardening. "It's over, man. Leave us alone." "Over?" "No, it just began." I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. It was a live video, broadcasting to all of our mutual friends and family, everyone who thought they knew Clara, the perfect wife. Clara gasped, understanding the implications. "Please, don't do this," she pleaded, her composure cracking. "Why not? You didn't spare me your secrets. Why should I spare you?" I hissed, stepping closer, the phone still aimed at their guilty faces. The confrontation drew the attention of passers-by, their eyes curious and judging. Clara's lover tried to grab my phone, but I sidestepped him, fueled by a bitter adrenaline. "This is who they are," I announced loudly to the gathering crowd, my voice steady despite the tumult inside. "Liars. Cheaters. Destroyers of trust." Clara was crying now, her tears a mix of shame and despair. "It was a mistake. Please." Her words were cut short as her lover, enraged, lunged at me. We scuffled briefly before I pushed him away, his body stumbling into the street just as a car turned sharply around the corner. The impact was sudden, horrifically loud, a sound that would haunt me forever. The driver stopped immediately, shock painted over his face as he realized what had happened. Clara screamed, running to her lover's side, but it was clear there was nothing to be done. The police arrived quickly, a blur of uniforms and questions. I stood back, my phone forgotten on the pavement, the live feed still running. What had started as a quest for revenge had ended in tragedy, the ultimate price paid not just by Clara, but by me as well. I turned away as they covered his body, Clara's wails of grief piercing the night. My revenge had been ruthless, cruel, and it had cost more than I ever intended. As I walked away from the chaos, from the destruction of lives intertwined with mine, I knew this was the end. There would be no forgiveness, no redemption. Only the bitter taste of loss and a haunting regret for the vengeance I thought I wanted. My steps were heavy, each one echoing the irrevocable severing of ties, not just with Clara, but with the man I once was. The night closed around me, a fitting shroud for a soul darkened by its own shadows.